So again, you're at impacts of the lead and copper rule revisions and improvements on community water supplies. And we're very happy to have you here with us today. Here's the team that will be presenting today. I'm Ruth Kersey. I'm the Senior Project Manager at Elevate, a nonprofit dedicated to making sure everyone has access to clean and affordable heat, cooling, power, and water in their homes and communities. And I'm also the project manager for Cook County TAP. My background is in public health, and for much of my career, I've been dedicated to reducing lead exposure, especially for children. It used to be lead paint, now it's lead in water. Unfortunately, lead keeps rearing its ugly head over and over again here. I'm pleased to be joined by Kristen Meehan of Engineering Enterprises to provide an overview of the impacts of LCRR and LCRI. Kristen has over 10 years of experience in the civil and environmental engineering field, and she's a project manager within Engineering Enterprises Municipal Group, where she focuses on the planning, design, and construction of infrastructure projects relating to lead service line replacement and water main replacement. She also focuses on lead regulation developments and compliance at both the Illinois and federal levels. So welcome to Cook County TAP, Kristen. We're very much looking forward to your presentation today. So here's the agenda for today. We'll start with a quick overview of Cook County TAP. I know many of you have been here before. There has been a few changes on our website, so I just want to share with some of those with you, what's new and what's coming. This should take no more than about 10 minutes, hopefully, maybe 12 at the tops. Then I'll turn the presentation over to Kristen, who will provide an excellent overview of LCRR and LCRI. And I was lucky enough to see her presentation at the Illinois section of the AWWA's WaterCon 2025. And so I think you'll really learn a lot from this presentation today. So without further ado, let's get moving here. So what is Cook County TAP? Cook County TAP is a resource hub designed to accelerate healthier water in Cook County communities. It's a free technical assistance with the aim of helping municipalities develop lead service line replacement programs and implement water affordability best practices. And so that's a little bit of a new addition to Cook County TAP, the affordability portion. We provide the resources you need to create affordable and effective initiatives that reduce lead in drinking water and decrease residential water costs, from starting a program and securing funding to encouraging participation from your residents. The result is intended to be a well-designed program that will improve the health and well-being of your community. And it's funded by Cook County using American Rescue Plan Act funds, and it's administered by Elevate. So Cook County TAP regularly updates the website and sends newsworthy and timely information on lead service line replacement and affordability issues. We'll also continue to engage the Cook County community to research best practices and lessons. Many of you may have had outreach from us asking you for interviews and other things. That's part of our attempt to assess best practices and see what's working and not out there in suburban Cook County. As we learn things, we'll be sharing them out with everybody else through our website. And on the docket right now for TAP is a new newsletter that's hopefully going to come out next week and digest to keep folks better informed. You can sign up to receive those newsletters, et cetera, from our website. If you're signed up for this today, you're registered for that essentially by default. But if you know somebody else who would like to receive it, you can point them to our website. A Cook County centered lead service line replacement planning playbook is also in the works. This document will contain steps for creating a robust plan and ideas for managing and funding a program. We'll include templates for communicating with the public and other helpful resources. And we look to have that probably somewhere in the summer, probably later in the summer, to be completed. And finally, look for new resources from the Water Affordability Program. That program is just getting up and running, but we have a couple of pages up there already. So this is our website, and I'm going to go ahead and take you to it and just do a quick walkthrough. So this is the landing page, and you can see here's lead service line replacement. I hope you're seeing this. Are you seeing this, Kristen? Okay, great.
Yes.
The parts for lead service line replacement are planning for lead service line replacement, funding, engaging your community, laws and regulations, and resources. There's also the water affordability page, and you can see that there's a couple of articles there that you might be interested in. For lead service line replacement, I'm just going to jump to the resources because that's where we've been putting a lot of new stuff recently. We have a couple of fact sheets up. But one of the things I wanted to share with the audience right now is we do have an state revolving fund scoring maps that we've put up. And this is important for communities because when they're looking to to submit an application to the state, they get scored based on certain criteria, and some of them are demographic criteria. And we've gone ahead and put this scoring map together so they can see which census tracts score highest in their community. We did it for the entire state of Illinois. I am going to zoom in here. It looks like a mess right now, but it does get better as you zoom in. Just bear with me. One more time. There you go. Okay, so you can see the community names start to pop up. I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. But essentially, for every census tract you see here, you can see the SRR, the colors that correspond to the different scoring levels. So just at a quick look, you can see which census tracts score higher and lower. If you go to, say, Bellwood here and you click on it, you can see that they have an SRF funding score of 325 based on the 7 variables that we were able to have access to. So this is using the formula that the Illinois EPA SRF for lead service line replacement applications requires. So their formula to generate the SRF funding score is what we used. We were not able to include possibly an additional 45 points for the number of lead service lines that are in each of the census tracts because we don't have access to that information, but we do have access to all of these other elements. And so that is what we use to generate the score. And then you would add in how many lead service lines are in that census tract, and that would also add to the score depending on where they fall in that. So that is that. In addition to the map, the interactive map, there are static maps available on the resources page for each of the variables. These are only available for Cook County, however. They're not for the entire state of Illinois because that would be impossible to read. So you can click on these static maps, and for each of those variables, this one's for medium household income, and you can see how that falls on the scale. And if you zoom in here, you can see the names of the communities that are supported by that. Okay. So that is the website. Please do go there. We do update it, and now the website is very active. So we're trying to put new information up there as much as we can. I wanted to do a shout out real quickly to let you know that our next webinar that's coming up is Harnessing GIS and Lead Service Line Replacement, Ensuring Compliance and Community Trust. So that's coming on May 8th. You can sign up for that on our website on the events page. Just one more second here to talk a little bit about Lead Care Cook County. Many of you may have been touched by this program, but for suburban Cook County, the Cook County has made funds available to replace the lead service lines at about 460 child cares throughout suburban Cook County. We are I think we're nearing 200 replacements at this point. Those funds do run out at the end of 2026, so we encourage you to take advantage of those. And again, this is free lead service line replacement from soup to nuts, from getting the lead service line identified, replaced, and doing all the restoration work. All of that is free for child care facilities. So we do encourage you to reach out to Lead Care Cook County at a municipal level and see how you can help push your child cares that are in your community into that program. Here's their contact information. Definitely note leadcarecookcounty.org. That's their website, and that's where child cares can go to enroll. So this is how to get in touch with us. You can always email Cook County TAP at cookcountytap@elevatenp.org or go to our website. And now I'll throw it over to Kristen to start her presentation. So I'll stop sharing, Kristen, and you can start sharing your screen.
Quick agenda for my presentation. I like to start off with acronyms because, as always, there's a lot of acronyms when we're talking about lead and regulations. Then I'll go over regulation timelines and an overview of the different regulations and how they compare to each other. I'll probably spend the majority of my time talking about the LCRR requirements since those are in effect now. I will then talk about the LCRI, which is, what's coming down the line in 2027. And then I'll have some closing remarks and key takeaways for you, and then plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. So with that, I'll flash up all these acronyms. The big ones you'll hear me say a lot today are LCRR, which is the Lead and Copper Rule revisions, and the LCRI, which is the Lead and Copper Rule improvements. Those are separate, but related, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But this is also just good reference if you're referencing this presentation later. So now we'll get into the regulation timeline and an overview of these regulations. So as I mentioned, we're going to focus on the LCRR and the LCRI. I've got the effective dates and the compliance dates shown here, but it's really important to understand the difference between those. So the effective date is essentially when the date goes into effect at the federal level. The compliance date is then when all relative parties are required to comply with that act. So that's usually the date we're most concerned about. For LCRR, that was effective December 16th of 2021, and it went into compliance of October of last year. That has been added to the Illinois Administrative Code as noted there. And now the LCRI has an effective date of December 30th of last year with a compliance date of November 1st. I do like to mention that there is a lot of uncertainty with LCRI right now. We've all probably heard about it a little bit, and I don't have a great answer for you today since it's still kind of up in the air. We, we know that AWWA has filed a challenge against the LCRI, so that's still pending. The new federal administration is also still reviewing the rule, and we don't know if it will be changed or repealed. So right now, and in this presentation especially, I'm going to focus on the LCRR since that's what's current and that's what we're focused on complying with right now. But we'll also focus on LCRI just to understand what might be coming down the pipeline in 2027. Another regulation that affects Illinois communities is the Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act that was signed on August 30th of 2021 with an effective date of January 1st, 2022. That's now a part of the Illinois compiled statutes as noted there. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this today since hopefully we're more familiar with that rule by now. But I will talk about some of the overlaps between that and the LCRR. So Illinois communities are really looking at three separate regulations when it comes to lead. I mentioned the Illinois Act, and then we've also got the LCRR on the federal level, which has now been adopted by Illinois, and then we're also looking at LCRI. So when you're looking at all three of these regulations, it's important to understand the most stringent regulation, and currently that's the most stringent regulation between the Illinois Act and the LCRR. And now I'll go into a couple of examples of that overlap and explaining the most stringent regulation. So a good example of this are the lead service line replacement plans. Most of us probably know that the Lead Service Line Replacement Notification Act required Illinois communities to submit their first plan on April 15th of 2024. And then the LCRR also requires lead service line replacement plans. Those were due on October 16th of 2024. So what do Illinois communities need to be doing, or what did we do? Illinois communities submitted their lead service line replacement plans in April of 2024. IEPA also made sure that these plans met the federal LCRR plan requirements, and then IEPA was in charge of turning those over to US EPA by October 16th of 2024. And then moving forward, Illinois communities are going to keep submitting those replacement plans April of every year. Another example of this regulation overlap is mandatory lead service line replacement. So under the Illinois Act, we have mandatory lead service line replacement starting in 2027. That's a 15 to 50-year timeline depending on your total number of lead service lines. And then we have the LCRR, which doesn't have a mandatory lead service line replacement rate unless you exceed the 90th percentile of your tap sampling at 10 parts per billion. And we'll go into the details on that, but just know that, kind of as a baseline, there's no mandatory lead service line replacement requirement under LCRR. LCRI, however, will require mandatory lead service line replacement starting in 2027, and that's a 10-year timeline for most communities. I do have an asterisk by that because there is an exception for communities that have a high lead service line burden, and I'll go into that in detail as well. So what do Illinois communities need to be focusing on now? Right now, I recommend preparing for lead service line replacement in the event of an action or trigger level exceedance under LCRR. That's really what's going to require you to do any sort of lead service line replacement prior to 2027. But then, assuming LCRI goes into effect as is, starting in 2027, we'll all be on that 10% annual replacement rate. And I do like to include that as of the regulation status in February of 2025. So with that, my key takeaways for you in this section are understanding the regulations that are currently in effect and understanding the most stringent requirements between those three. It's also important to stay up to date on upcoming regulations and any regulatory changes. Obviously, Cook County TAP is a great resource for that. So next we'll really get into the LCRR requirements. A big requirement for LCRR is the lead action and trigger levels. So I like to note that there was no change from the previous lead and copper rule for the action level. It's still at 15 parts per billion, but it does now require more actions than the previous rule. And we'll talk about those actions throughout the rest of the presentation. What was introduced in the LCRR was the new trigger level, which is 10 parts per billion. That will trigger additional planning, monitoring, treatment, and lead service line replacement requirements. So one of the big things everybody's thinking about now are the updated lead and copper tap sampling requirements from LCRR. So this includes updated tier groups. So all community water supplies were required to submit a new sample site plan to IEPA since the tier groups changed. And now we are focusing on collecting those samples from sites that are served by lead service lines if they're present in your system. The monitoring frequency might also change for you. So now all systems with lead or galvanized requiring replacement are switched to a 6-month standard monitoring system. And finally, samples from lead service lines are required to use the 1st and 5th liter draw. And we'll talk about all of these topics in more detail now. So I mentioned those updated LCRR tier groups. The main takeaway here is that it's focusing on lead service lines. So you're starting at tier 1 with your single family structures served by lead services, and then you're exhausting all of your tier 1s before you move on to tier 2, exhausting tier 2 and moving on, and so on. So if you have enough tier 1 sites to meet your minimum number of sample sites, all of your samples will be served by tier 1 sites. I mentioned that you have to use tier 1 sites if they're present in your system. If you have an insufficient number of tier 1 sites, you'll move on to tier 2, 3, 4, and 5. I do also like to note that you should not use sites with point of entry treatment devices such as softeners or reverse osmosis. The exception there is if sites with point of entry treatment devices make up at least 90% of the sites within your system, then you would be allowed to use those. And that would just be something you would communicate to IEPA when making your sample site plan. The number of monitoring sites did not change under LCRR, but I like to show this table because some of us might have been on reduced monitoring and are now moving back to standard monitoring. So it's important here to notice that additional number of standard monitoring sites. And I also like to suggest that you have backup sites ready. So if you have 60 sites that you are required to sample under standard monitoring, definitely recommend having 70, 80 sites available in the event that somebody's non-responsive or they're on vacation or you can't collect that sample for whatever reason. Monitoring frequency, I mentioned that all systems with lead or galvanized are now on standard monitoring. You should have received notice from IEPA on that. That is every 6 months. So we're sampling twice a year from January to June and then July to December. To qualify for reduced monitoring, a system must meet one of the following criteria for 2 consecutive 6-month monitoring periods. If you want to qualify for annual sampling, you would need to get your 90th percentile between 10 and 15 parts per billion, and then triannual sampling would mean that your 90th percentile is below that trigger level of 10 parts per billion. The tap sampling methods changed a little bit under LCRR as well. So most of us have probably heard about the wide mouth bottle requirement. The 6-hour stagnation period did not change, as well as collecting from a cold water tap. But now we're sampling the first liter at all sites and the fifth liter at all sites served by lead service lines. So I'd like to show my graphic over on the left that shows for lead and galvanized services, you're collecting 5 consecutive samples. That first liter will be tested for copper, that fifth liter will be tested for lead. You can essentially throw out bottles 2 through 4. Those don't even need to be sent to the lab. It's really just to ensure that that fifth liter is collected correctly. For non-lead services, that first liter is going to be collected and then be sampled for copper and lead. So most of us are probably feeling the impacts of this tap sampling already. This is an increased number of samples twice per year. So this means increased communication and coordination with your customers, which takes a lot of time. Increased coordination of those active and inactive sites with IEPA. That's all done via email, but you have to update this sample site plan PDF every time you do it. And there's also going to be an increased demand on labs. So I highly recommend getting in contact with your labs just so that you know your samples will be in on time. There is the potential for a monitoring violation if you don't sample all of your sites in a tier group if they are available. So for example, if you have 60 sample sites and you have at least 60 lead service lines in your system, but you can't get all of those lead service lines sampled, IEPA has said there is the potential for a monitoring violation, which is not ideal, but the good news is that under LCRI there is a fix for this, and we'll talk about that when we get to LCRI. So you've done all your tap sampling. Now what do you do with your results? The results are really twofold. So you've got results on the individual site level. We'll talk about notifying those residents and then what needs to be done if any of those individual sites exceed the action level. And then you have your 90th percentile calculation. So we'll go into how to calculate your 90th percentile, what the requirements are if you exceed the action or trigger level at the 90th percentile, and then reporting and notifying the correct parties of the results. So at the individual site level, you are required to notify those sites within 30 days if the samples do not exceed 15 parts per billion. And if the sample does exceed that action level of 15 parts per billion, you'll be required to notify those sample sites no later than 3 calendar days after receiving the results. In the event of a lead action level exceedance, so 15 parts per billion at an individual site, this will trigger a find and fix requirement. So the first step of this is within 5 days after receiving those sample results, you'll sample a water quality parameter sample at a similar site within a half-mile of the sampling site that exceeded the action level. So these parameters include pH, alkalinity, orthophosphate if you use orthophosphate, and silica if you use a silicate compound. Then step 2, within 30 days, you'll collect a follow-up sample from that site. It'll basically be the same procedure you used when doing the initial sample. And then step 3, within 6 months after the end of the tap sampling period, you'll evaluate your results and submit a local optimal corrosion control treatment recommendation for the sample site. And then just a couple of notes at the bottom. If you're already in the process of optimizing or optimizing your corrosion control treatment, you do not need to recommend a find and fix treatment to IEPA. And I also like to note that lead service line replacement is not a requirement of find and fix. So that's all of the requirements for the individual sites. Now we'll talk about the 90th percentile. So first of all, how do you calculate the 90th percentile and what do you need to include when calculating the 90th percentile? You must include all of your sampled tier 1 and tier 2 sites. You'll only include the highest results from tiers 3, 4, and 5 if you don't have enough tier 1 and tier 2 sites to meet your minimum number of sites. And then you won't include any school or daycare samples, and you won't include any of those find and fix follow-up samples. So I'm going to run through just a quick step-by-step calculation of the 90th percentile. First, you'll start by listing your sample results in ascending order from lowest to highest concentration. That's that column shown on the right. Then you'll assign each result a number from 1 to the total number of samples taken. So in this example, it's 1 to 60. You'll multiply the total numbers of samples taken by 0.9. So in this case, that's 54. And then the concentration in that sample that corresponds to that number is your 90th percentile concentration. So in this example, our 54th sample was 10.1. That is our 90th percentile. So now you have your 90th percentile. What do you do if that exceeds the action or the trigger level? So if your 90th percentile exceeds the trigger level of 10, but is below that action level of 15, you'll be required to submit recommendations for actions that you will take if you do later exceed the action level. IEPA will also require mandatory lead service line replacement at a rate that's approved by them. And you'll be required to notify every customer served by lead, galvanized, and unknown services within 30 days. If you do have a 90th percentile action level exceedance, so above 15, that will trigger a Tier 1 public notification. You will start mandatory lead service line replacement at a minimum of 3%. There is some flexibility for small systems. You'll then provide public education materials. IEPA will also work with you on optimizing your corrosion control treatment or re-optimizing. And then you'll also be required to offer to sample the tap water of any customer who requests it, but there is no requirement to pay for that testing. So that Tier 1 public notification will go out to all people served by the water system. And there is one or more methods of delivery that's allowable for this. So you can use broadcast media, which is radio or TV, posting in conspicuous locations throughout the service area, hand delivery, or another delivery method that's approved in writing by IEPA. And I do like to note that this is within 24 hours of receiving your action level exceedance notice from IEPA. Under the LCRR, there also is some small system flexibility. So systems that serve less than 10,000 people can choose one of the following options after an action or trigger level exceedance. So you can choose to replace all of your lead service lines on an agency-approved schedule, work on your corrosion control treatment, issue point of use devices to each household or building, or choose to replace all lead-bearing internal plumbing. So what are some of the impacts of these tap sampling results? Obviously, exceeding the 90th percentile is going to result in mandatory lead service line replacement, which would be a lot of work for most communities. It's also important to understand the steps to be taken after a lead action or trigger level exceedance. That's both on the individual site level and on the community-wide 90th percentile level. I also recommend that you prepare your notifications and outreach materials now. There's just a lot to keep track of, and in the event of an action level exceedance, you don't have a whole lot of time to prepare those and get those out. And then I also recommend being prepared to respond to resident inquiries. So whether that's during your inventory process or during construction or sending out these notices, be prepared to have a lot of conversations with residents. So next we'll get into school and child care sampling. This requirement under LCRR includes the mandatory sampling of elementary schools, which is pre-K through 8th grade, also includes licensed daycares or childcare facilities, and this only applies to buildings that are built prior to January 1st, 2014. The requirement is to sample 20% of facilities per year starting this year for the next 5 years. And then secondary schools, which are basically high schools, don't need to be sampled. It's not a mandatory sampling requirement, but they can request sampling from you as well. So where do you start with this school and childcare sampling requirement? Luckily, we just got some guidance from IEPA last week. So hopefully your responsible operator in charge received the IEPA template that was sent out. So this is a list of all schools and childcare facilities that are served by your water system. IEPA is asking you to submit that by May 15th, 2025. And there is some guidance in that email, and I have guidance as well if you need resources to help compile that list of schools and childcare facilities. Step 2, providing public education materials annually. So these notices include the health risks of lead in drinking water and a notice of the required sampling. And then you'll collect 5 samples per school and 2 samples per childcare facility once you get down to sampling. These are first draw samples with an 8 to 18-hour stagnation period, 250 milliliters in volume, and outlets typically used for consumption. And there is more detail on those samples, obviously. There's very specific outlet requirements. So I believe in schools it's 2 drinking waters, nurse's station. The IEPA has very specific requirements for those, so we are looking forward to that further guidance from IEPA. Step 4, after you do your sampling, you'll provide the results to the facilities within 30 days, and then you'll report those results annually to IEPA, IDPH, and then any local health departments. And then you'll repeat this annually until all schools and childcare facilities are sampled. I mentioned that you might get some additional sampling requests from secondary schools, but you don't have to exceed 20% of these samples. If you do get a bunch of requests in one year, they would just get moved to the next year. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on water quality parameter sampling, but just know that the range results must be submitted using the updated WQP range excursion form every 6 months. And then after 3 consecutive years of not exceeding the lead trigger action level, you can qualify for reduced sampling. LCRR also introduced some post-lead service line replacement requirements. So following every lead service line replacement, systems must immediately provide filters, offer to collect a follow-up tap sample between 3 to 6 months. And this does apply to any sort of scenario. So this is when a emergency repair is made on a lead service line, or if a lead service line is replaced under a water main replacement program, or just a standalone lead service line replacement program. I do like to note that there's no requirement to pay for this follow-up tap sampling after the lead service line replacement, but we are required to provide those results within 30 days if the samples don't exceed 15 parts per billion, and within 3 days for samples that do exceed 15 parts per billion. So those water filters that need to be handed out after lead service line replacement do have pretty specific requirements. The community is required to supply filters for 6 months of use. So I like to note that sometimes this involves replacement cartridges depending on the make and model of those filters. So make sure you're reading the specs and the details on those filters. Sometimes just one filter is enough for 6 months. Sometimes they're only rated for 3 months, so you might have to hand out an extra replacement cartridge. Also, if the service feeds a multi-unit building, the filters must be supplied to each unit. So for example, if it's a duplex, you would hand out 2 sets of filters. Those filters also need to be certified by an accredited third party for NSF ANSI 53, that's for lead removal. And you can find the lead certification, the filter certification at the NSF website listed there. So the impacts of this school and post-lead service line replacement testing, obviously, again, a lot more coordination with that minimum 20% sampling at elementary schools and daycares. That's annually starting this year. Highly recommend having approved water filters on hand in the case of an emergency repair and needing to hand out those filters immediately. And then also recommend preparing your post-lead service line replacement sampling procedures. So how are you going to offer that follow-up tap sampling within 3 to 6 months? Are you going to send out a letter? Are you going to hang a door hanger? Just all good things to start thinking about. So that's really the majority of LCRR. Now we'll get into the LCRI, which would be going into effect in November of 2027. I think one of the big things everybody thinks about with LCRI is the 10-year lead service line replacement timeline. So this is 10% annual replacement starting in 2027, meaning all of your lead service lines are replaced by December 31st of 2037. This now makes your lead service line replacement program independent of your 90th percentile lead levels, so that requirement will go away. And as I mentioned previously, there is a deferred deadline available for systems with 39 lead service line replacements per 1,000 service connections. It's kind of a weird calculation, but basically, if you have a very high number of lead service lines relative to your total service connections in your community. Another big change with the LCRI is it will lower the action level from 15 to 10. So this will remove the trigger level, and now all of those action level requirements are going to go into effect at 10 parts per billion. So that tier 1 public notification, installing or re-optimizing corrosion control treatment, and doing public education will all be effective at 10 parts per billion. The tap sampling procedure will also change a little bit under LCRI, so that first and fifth liter for lead services will still be sampled, but now we're going to be taking the higher value of the first and fifth liter lead concentration and use that for our 90th percentile calculation. So now you're testing your first liter for both copper and lead, and you're testing your fifth liter for lead and using that higher lead value. I did mention that there is a clarification under LCRI, so now sites are considered no longer available after a customer refuses or is non-responsive after 2 outreach attempts. So if you need to be sampling that lead service line for whatever reason and you're not able to, the good news is this will keep you from getting a monitoring violation. The notification of results to these sample sites is going to change with LCRI as well. So now, regardless of the tap sampling results, you're going to need to notify those sites within 3 business days after receiving the results. The LCRI will also update those lead service line replacement plans a bit, although this doesn't apply to Illinois communities a whole lot. But those additional plan requirements are going to include a strategy to inform customers and consumers about the plan and replacement program, and an identification of any legal requirements that affect a system's ability to gain access to conduct full lead service line replacement. Additionally, the plan must be made publicly available, but this is already a requirement under the Illinois Act. The LCR inventory will change just a little bit, so there is going to be an added focus on the connector material or the goosenecks. IEPA has already added this into their inventory spreadsheet, so you've probably seen that. Systems also are going to be required to respond to customer inquiries on incorrect material categorizations within 60 days. And then finally, systems have to validate the accuracy of their non-lead service line categorizations. This is going to apply to every community, regardless if they have lead or not, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. So these non-lead validations will go into effect in 2027 and need to be completed by November of 2034. As I mentioned, this applies to all systems, regardless of if they have lead in their inventory or not. Specifically, it requires 2 points of visual validation along the pipe exterior. And if the ownership of the service is shared, which it is in many communities, you must visually inspect both the public and private sides. So all of your non-lead service lines will go into a validation pool, and the validation pool includes anything that meets one of the following, will include all of your non-lead service lines unless it meets one of the following criteria. So if the service was installed after 1988, or if the service has been previously replaced, or if the service has been visually verified along 2 points already, that doesn't need to be included in your validation pool. And then the table over on the lower right just shows the number of validations required based on the size of your validation pool. LCRI will also increase their focus on the public education and outreach. So this includes updated health effects language in all of your public notices, education materials, and consumer confidence reports. And then for any system serving a large portion of non-English speaking consumers, all your public education materials must include that information in the appropriate languages. In the event of an action level exceedance for your 90th percentile, all of those same LCRR public notification requirements are going to apply, in addition to needing to conduct a public education event no later than 60 days after the TAP sampling period ends, and then delivering public education materials to all bill paying customers at every service connection address. In the event of 2 or more lead action level exceedances in a 5-year period, that's also going to require making filters available to all consumers and then conducting further public outreach activities that might include a public meeting, participating in community events, contacting customers by phone, text, email, or door hanger, or doing a social media campaign. So the key takeaway here is LCRI has an even increased focus on public education. So with that, I just have a couple of closing remarks and key takeaways. Hopefully by now we're all working on those updated sample site plans, getting those submitted to IEPA, and getting all of our active sites approved. Make sure you're coordinating with your labs to ensure that they're prepared for an increased number and frequency of samples. Also, now that we've got that school and daycare inventory spreadsheet, make sure you're filling that out and submitting it by May 15th, and then start sampling your 20% of elementary schools and daycares in 2025. Prepare your public notices and education materials. So both LCRR and LCRI have an increased focus on communication with consumers. So make sure that your communications are accurate and consistent. Basically, make sure that everybody on your team who is interacting with residents are reading from the same script and giving the same message when it comes to talking about lead. Also, as I mentioned, make sure you have approved water filters on hand. These are needed for any sort of lead service line replacement scenario. Prepare for mandatory lead service line replacement. It's coming. For some communities, it might already be here, but it's definitely something we all need to be preparing for now. And then continue documenting your service line material at every opportunity. If you're inside the home for a meter changeout program, just note the material then, grab a picture if you can. If you're doing other maintenance out in your distribution system, whether it's a water main replacement program or other underground project, use that as an opportunity to document those service line materials as well. Having an accurate inventory is only going to help you in the future when you get to lead service line replacement. And with that, I'd just like to make a quick plug for our lead and copper resources page. This QR code will take you to our website. We try to put out a lot of helpful resources, infographics for communities as these regulations come out and as we focus on all of the different requirements that we need to comply with. And with that, I think it's time for questions.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Kristen. It's a lot of information. I just want to let people know that we will be, and I'm going to put this in the chat right now, that we will be posting this presentation on the Cook County TAP YouTube channel in a few days. We do a little editing and then we put it up there. So I'll make sure everybody gets notification of this. I think you need multiple touches with this information before it really all sinks in. So if you're feeling overwhelmed at this point, you're not alone. And we're here to support you at Cook County TAP. And also, again, we'll have this posted on our YouTube channel. Like, again, thank you very much, Kristen, for taking a very complicated three, elements, the Illinois requirements, the revisions and the improvements, and trying to put them together in an understandable way. And I think you do a great job of it. So thanks again. I do have a few questions here. So I'll start with one easy one. There was a question about putting up the template for or where you get the sampling for schools and daycares template that you mentioned. Can you repeat that for folks?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not, at least as of yesterday, I have not seen it on IEPA's website. So they only sent it out via email, but I can tell you that we went ahead and we put it on our website. So if you do make it to our website, you should be able to find it. If you can't find it, feel free to email me as well. I should have put up my email address here, but it's kmeehan@eiweb.com.
And I'll put it in the chat here.
Thank you.
Um, great. It's just eei.com, right, Kristen?
eiweb.com.
Okay, just put it in the chat. So thank you for that. I have a few more questions. So about record keeping, for example, for all the sampling that you have to do. There's a question here about, is there a format required, or do you have any recommendations for how to catalog that information?
That's a good question. I don't have any good guidance as far as the format that IEPA is looking for when we're talking about, outreach to residents or, the number of attempts that you're making. But I can say, just to make sure that you're noting the days that you're reaching out to people, the method that you're using to reach out, whether that's via letter, via email, door knocking, make sure that you're noting that somewhere, whether it's in your GIS program, which would be great because then you have all of that really at your fingertips, or, just a simple spreadsheet. But I think, when it comes down to tap sampling, and if you're saying that one of your sites is non-responsive, IEPA is going to ask, how many times did you reach out to them? When did you reach out to them? What methods? So as much as you can document that and be able to provide it back to IEPA, that will definitely help you.
Right, and Cook County TAP will also post format examples for folks as well. So we'll be looking into that and we'll add that to our site and let people know when that's available. So thanks for that, Kristen. Another question here about TAP sampling. Under the revisions, post lead service line replacement, so that would be then sampling a non-lead service line. And then you only have to take the 1 liter sample at the tap. Is that correct? And analyze it for lead.
Correct. So yeah, that follow-up sample, which is completely optional, you basically just have to offer it to residents and they can opt in or not. But yeah, that follow-up tap sample, I don't think there's a whole lot of guidance on what exactly that entails. You could do kind of a similar approach to your tap sampling where you do those 5 sequential samples, or just pull a first draw sample.
Okay, great, thank you. Right now, I think that's all the questions. I do have a comment here that I just wanted to share with the audience. So essentially, there is a comment about the waste of tossing so many bottles out. I don't know if you have heard of labs and what they do with the bottles after they sample them, but it's a huge amount of waste. So I just wanted to acknowledge that these are that's some of the collateral damage here,
Mm-hmm.
and give voice to the folks that are putting this in. Also, that sometimes old faucets, internal plumbing really elevates the levels of lead, and that's something that it's very difficult for communities to control. I don't know if you have any anecdotal information about folks that have dealt with that or communities that have dealt with that and how they've managed.
I think that's part of the idea with the follow-up sample at an individual site that's exceeding the action level is following up and doing that sequential sample again. Because if you're getting a really high first liter sample, that's probably coming from that faucet fixture, and that would be your recommendation to IEPA is saying, hey, samples 2 through 5 are all very low. The first liter sample is very high. We, you know, we suspect that the fixture itself is lead and has high level of lead, and that's what's causing it. I don't have any good anecdotal information as far as like where that will go with IEPA. I think that's something we'll figure out as more communities get into those find and fix scenarios.
Great. And then I have one more question here. I think it's really more for me, although you could answer it too, Kristen, if you'd like. But do you have a template or sample letter for the first and fifth liter draw method for residents?
Yes, I think IEPA released this, although it's not on their website. If it's if they're talking about, instructions, I have seen something out there, and that would be something that would be good to add to our website as well. So Ruth, that's something I can share with you too if you want to put it up on your website.
That would be great. And we also are working on templates for many different types of the communications that have to go up. So we hope to have those available on our website. Also, again, as I've mentioned before, things are starting to get put up on our website more quickly now. So I really do recommend folks go back and check our website periodically, but we will also be sending out notifications when those resources become available. I think that's it for questions, unless there's anybody who would like to um, come off mute. I'll just double check. You can raise your hand and I'd be happy to allow you to talk. But otherwise, if there are no additional questions, I just wanted to mention that we do have a GIS and lead service line replacement webinar coming up next week, same time, same place, next Thursday. So please do register for that. I know we had a couple of questions about Cook County, about GIS and record keeping, and Kristen mentioned it. So do check out that webinar. There's some great information there for you. In addition, we will have this presentation one more time up on the YouTube channel in a couple of days, and we'll let you know when that happens. You will also be getting instructions about how to apply for continuing education credits in the follow-up email. So thank you everyone for your attendance today, and we look forward to continuing to engage you through Cook County TAP into the future. Kristen, awesome job. Thanks so much for joining us. Hope to have you back again. And with that, have a great day, everyone.